War communism is a set of policies enacted by the Bolsheviks during the Civil War between 1918 and 1920 to guarantee food and essential items for the Red Army and the people. To understand the need for war communism, it is important to look back at the events leading up to the Russian Civil War. Why was there such a strong divide between the people of Russia? How did these tensions escalate to the point of war? Prior to the Civil War of 1917, Russia was ruled by an autocracy in which all power was controlled by a single individual, the Tsar, who was succeeded by his eldest son. During Tsar Nicholas II's rule, the country was in immense social-political unrest. Many protested against the Russian social-political system, as well as terrible living conditions. These events are now referred to as the First Russian Revolution. A hallmark of this revolution is a day referred to as Bloody Sunday, during which up to 200 peaceful demonstrators were killed by Russian soldiers. This was a major catalyst in transforming the Russian autocracy into a constitutional monarchy. Following these, Nicholas II issued the October Manifesto, promising civil liberties and an elected parliament known as Duma. This was a rather temporary solution, as there were still tensions that continuously escalated due to poor living and working conditions, as well as impracticable taxation of the peasantry. Following the assassination of Francis Ferdinand, Germany declared war on Russia, which led to growing Russian patriotism and a decline in support for socialist groups. However, Russia's armies did rather poorly, and the responsibility for this was placed on Tsar Nicholas II. Civil unrest continued to escalate, hitting a peak in February of 1917, when food rationing was announced, leading to what is now known as the February Revolution. Since food was already scarce in many areas, this led to a panic in many cities, as well as protests and riots. Mutinous Russian army forces joined the revolutionaries, and Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne 3 days following these events. Months following the Tsar's abdication, Russia's provisional government was overthrown by the Bolsheviks, who later assassinated the Tsar and his family, throwing Russia into a civil war. The Red Army successfully defended the new Bolshevik government, now led by Vladimir Lenin, against Russian anti-Bolshevik armies. However, this newly formed government suffered not only from inner turmoil, but from external conflicts as well. On March of 1918, Czech and Slovak soldiers were stranded on Soviet soil, and when met with poorly armed and disciplined Red Guards, the soldiers easily defeated them. This led to Lenin's realization that the Red Army was to be reformed into a model with a centralized hierarchy of command, similar to that of the Tsar. This was worrisome to many within the party's rank and line, as well as peasants who did not want to leave their villages during harvest. Lenin unleashed a mass conscription, which led to an extremely rapid growth in the Red Army. It became so large that the weakened Russian economy could not sustain it. With scarce supplies, soldiers lost morale, deserting the Red Army by the thousands, leaving no food or supplies for incoming soldiers, leading to more deserters. War communism was implemented as a response to the catch-22 of mass conscription, food and supply shortage, and deserters. A variety of policies were enacted to transition Russia into this command economy, many of which would further upset the peasantry and the working class.
The Civil War was a necessity to put communist ideas into action. To minimize the power of the kulaks and assist the Red Army, war communism policies were established during the Civil War. One of the first policies was forced conscription, or the militarization of labor in essential industries. The motto was industry or the Red Army, helping the revolution as a soldier or a worker. The second policy on the Bolsheviks' list was requisitioning, or the abolishment of grain monopoly and private trade. On May 9th of 1918, the policy of confiscating agricultural products at a fixed price was enacted. Enraged peasants burned and hid their surplus harvest. The Bolsheviks reacted with great violence, torture, and mass imprisonment as a response. In January of 1919, the Bolsheviks created more restrictions with a new policy, food levy. This limited the powers of the local food committees and extended monopoly to all harvest. The peasants' surplus of harvest now also belonged to the state, which ultimately led to a great famine. On June 28th of 1918, the third policy on the nationalization of all large-scale industries was established. And to maximize the state control on the economy, factory managers were replaced with government-appointed officials who knew nothing about how to run the industries. This control over labor meant that everyone was a government worker, from the bus driver to the journalist. Peasant farms were also subject to extreme changes in management, and individuals who had never stepped foot on a farm before were now overseeing agricultural production. The USSR aimed for a planned economy where industries were told what to produce. The third policy established during war communism was rationing. It began with food rationing coupons that ultimately defined a person's class in the Union. The first class ration given to army soldiers and state officials was meager but adequate, as described by Feist on page 114 of the Civil War and Making of the Soviet Union essay. The second class ration given to the workers was even less than what was given to the government officials. At the end of the hierarchical ladder in the USSR were the bourgeoisie, or enemies of the state, who received the third class ration.
The Russian Civil War lasted for 3 years and had 3 major players. The Red Army was an assembly of workers and intellectuals led by Lenin and Trotsky who were living in the shadow of the Tsarist government. After the November Revolution, this force, mainly an agrarian revolt, fought to socialize trade, industry, and agriculture. Their motto was peace, land, and bread. The peasants who found themselves on this side of the war fought to own their own land and seize it from big landowners. However, the Soviets feared this would result in another form of capitalism, which they were trying to abolish in the first place. The Red Army was able to exercise control over both the Russian government and the peasant class through their policy of razverchka, which was the procurement of grains from the farmers. By doing this, the Bolsheviks were able to keep their opponents in an impoverished state. The White Army were the counter-revolutionaries in the Russian Civil War. Many were former imperial officers, previously on the side of the Tsar. Because of this, the White Army had more military experience and elite training. The British, United States, Italy, and other allied forces provided them with resources referred to as matériel with the French spelling, in hopes of maintaining Russia's capitalist economy. Their units primarily remained in South Russia. In spite of all their training and foreign aid, the White Army was defeated by the Bolsheviks because of a disagreement on leadership, being unnecessarily cruel to villagers, including burning the villages down, leading to the creation of village black markets, and most importantly, their lack of morale compared to the Red Army, who was fervently trying to set up a lasting system of communism. The Green Army was the deserters' uprising, rural rebels led by both anarchist and former Tsarist officers. A brief and unstable conglomerate of peasants with an ill-defined mission, it was in opposition of both sides of the war, named Green for its association with peasants and agriculture. Deserters in the Red Army peaked in 1919, and the Red Army retaliated with the Central Anti-Desertion Commission to confiscate the property of any deserters and their allies, a somewhat anarchist movement that spread throughout the people, primarily by rumor.
In regard to the military, war communism was generally affected at its main role supporting the Red Army and stopping the development of the White Army and in recovering the majority of the domain of the previous Russian Empire from that point. In regard to the social effects, the urban areas encompassing open country, the populace experienced difficulties because of the war. Workers, in light of the outrageous shortage, were starting to decline to co-work and giving nourishment for the war exertion. Laborers started moving from the urban areas to the open country, where the odds to take care of themselves were higher, accordingly further diminishing the chance of deal of modern merchandise for food and intensifying the situation of the staying metropolitan populace, economy, and mechanical creation. Somewhere in the range of 1918 and 1920, Petrograd lost 70% of its populace, and Moscow lost over 50%. A progression of labor strikes and workers' uprising, pitiless out everywhere in the nation. For example, the Tambov disobedience. A defining moment accompanied the Kronstadt resistance at the Kronstadt Maritime Base toward the beginning of March 1921. The defiance frightened London. since Bolsheviks considered Krasnodar Marinage the reddest of the Reds. The idea of these uprisings and their administrations were likewise of noteworthy concern, since they were commonly left-wing uprisings drove opposition liberals, subsequently making rivalry with the Bolsheviks. As per David Christian, the Cheka, the state Communist Party mystery police, detailed 118 worker operations in February 1921. Marxist authorities were deadened by Russian starvation of 1921 to 1922, which harmonized with the cataclysmic emergency of the war and financial troubles looked by the new system. These militarization endeavors were taken to support the Red Army for the war exertion and the guard of the new state, for legitimate coordinations, and to disseminate the scant supplies to individuals that the system considered required it more than the others, for example, the Red Army. The economic results were a black market rose in Russia. In spite of the danger of military log and profiteering, the ruble imploded and trade aggressively supplemented cash as a mechanism of exchange, and by 1921, weight industry yield had tumbled from 20% of 1913 levels. 90% of wages were paid with merchandise instead of cash, 11% of trains needed a fix, and food orderings joined with the impacts of 7 years of war and a serious dry season added to starvation that caused somewhere in the range of 3 and 10 million deaths. Coal creation diminished from 27.5 million tons to 7 million tons, while by and large industrial facility creation likewise declined from 10 million rubles to 1 million rubles. As per the prominent history specialist David Christian, the grain gather was likewise slight from 80.1 million tons to 46.5 million tons.
So was war communism a necessary evil? There were many preceding situations that plagued Russia and followed the Bolsheviks. However, war communism ended up being rather counterintuitive as it harmed the people it swore to protect. Although the ideology behind war communism was not evil in itself, the execution was a necessary evil of the time for the Bolsheviks to win the Civil War. While war communism was a fundamental step in the process of becoming a communist nation, it set the dangerous precedent that the lives and privacy of citizens were disposable in the course of this economic experiment.